The German princess, Catherine the Great, rose to become Russia's empress. She was a powerful and capable leader who grew the Russian Empire and brought about numerous changes to enhance the quality of life for her people. Undoubtedly, one of history's most captivating and accomplished queens was Catherine the Great. Her birth name was Sophie Friederike Augusta von Anhalt-Zerbst, and she was born in a minor German principality in 1729. She was an intelligent, inquisitive youngster who enjoyed learning and reading. She married Peter III, the future Russian emperor, in 1744. Peter was an unstable and harsh man, and the marriage was not joyful. Catherine toppled her husband in a coup in 1762, becoming the Empress of Russia. Catherine ruled with strength and efficiency. In order to improve the lives of her subjects, she implemented numerous reforms and grew the Russian Empire. At the age of 67, Catherine the Great passed away in 1796. She's still regarded as one of the most significant individuals in Russian history because of her accomplishments, strength, and intelligence. An intriguing and accomplished leader, Catherine the Great made a lasting impression on Russia. She was a force for advancement in the Enlightenment, a powerful and capable leader, and a patron of the arts and sciences. In 1729, there was a buzz of excitement in the air in Stettin, a Prussian principality that is now part of Szczecin, Poland. Princess Sophie Friederike Augusta von Anhalt-Zerbst came amid the opulent grandeur and busy streets, signaling the beginning of a life destined for glory. Her upbringing was everything but lavish. She was born into a modest, noble family and was not a princess by blood. However, a burning desire for education and ambition boiled brilliantly in her modest surroundings. Known by her loving nickname, Sophie was everything but a normal princess. She was hungry for the whisper of intellectual arguments and the murmurs of prohibited texts, unlike her peers, who were fixated on gossip and courtly protocol. French teachers taught her the grace of language, and wise governess Elizabeth Babet-Cardell encouraged her independence. Sophie was a voracious reader, devouring books on politics, philosophy, and history. Every word piqued her interest in the world outside of her tiny principality. It wasn't all academic endeavors during her early years. Bright and vivacious, Sophie would frequently take her brothers and neighborhood kids on raucous sword-playing and daring adventures. She arranged pretend fights, climbed trees, and rejoiced in the freedom of adventure, causing laughter to resound through the hallways. Her vivacity foretold her bold leadership style. However, destiny had other ideas for the little princess. Sophie's mother, Johanna Elizabeth, arranged for her daughter to be betrothed to Peter, the apparent heir to the Russian throne, in a deliberate attempt to forge relationships. Sophie's life took a dramatic shift when she was 14. She left behind her beloved Stettin and set out to pursue an exciting and terrifying future. Sophie changed after she arrived in Russia. After changing her identity to Catherine Alexeyevna, she threw herself into the complex dance of court life. Acquiring knowledge of the Russian language and culture, she skillfully maneuvered through the political terrain. Her quick wit and charm won over hearts, and experienced diplomats and intellectuals were amazed by her bright mind. She did not, however, have a blissful marriage to Peter, who is now the Grand Duke of Peter. Intellectual pursuits bore little interest to him. Prussian military training and silly games did. Their incompatibility served as a fertile environment for resentment and isolation. But ever resourceful, Catherine turned to books, intellectual debates, and building relationships with powerful people for comfort. Catherine met with eminent intellectuals in private to establish a reading circle because she wanted both political influence and intellectual stimulation. They talked about Enlightenment values, which promoted knowledge, reason, and advancement. These concepts struck a profound chord with Catherine and became the cornerstones of her reign. Catherine's popularity increased as a result of the public's and the court's alienation caused by Peter's erratic behavior. She came out as a ray of hope, a living example of the progressive values her reading group promoted. Catherine overthrew Peter in a daring coup d'état in 1762, with the help of the people and the soldiers, taking the crown and making herself the Empress of all Russia. Sophie, the curious youngster from a modest principality, had developed into Catherine the Great, a monarch with the power to influence the course of a sizable empire. But her trip was far from over. Ambition was still raging, ready to burst into a new phase of cultural innovation, territorial expansion, and reforms. The extraordinary life of Catherine the Great would have a lasting influence on Russia, and the seeds planted in Stettin were about to produce fruit. It was 1745, and the air was in. Petersburg erupted with excitement. Princess Catherine, who was once Sophie of Anhalt-Zerbst, was erect at the altar, her hand extended toward Grand Duke Peter, who would shortly become Tsar Peter III. Political maneuvering brought them together with the prospect of powerful alliances and dynastic stability. However, there was evil hiding beneath the shiny exterior, just itching to burst. Years earlier, their first meeting had been a personality clash. Because Catherine was a voracious learner with a sharp mind, she found Peter's crude humor and childish interests repulsive. He, for his part, disregarded her academic pursuits and earnestness. Even with these early misgivings, fate, or rather their ambitious moms, had decided they were suited. There was no comfort on the wedding night. Peter, abandoning Catherine for noisy celebrations, set the tone for their tragic union. The sad truth of their incompatibility emerged. He showed little interest in scholarly studies or his new bride, being enthralled by Prussian military training and juvenile hobbies. When left alone in their lavish rooms, Catherine took comfort in literature and the murmur of court rumors. Peter had unpredictable behavior that frequently verged on cruelty. He expressed his love for his lover, Elizabeth Vorontsova, in public while making fun of her progressive views and intellect. The once bright young lady was imprisoned in a golden cage, her soul gradually deteriorating from humiliation and abuse. However, Catherine refused to give up easily. She started a quiet revolt because of a potent combination of dissatisfaction and aspiration. She developed connections with powerful people, such as the charming officer Grigory Orlov and the astute diplomat Nikita Panin. Her confidants served as a sounding board for her, encouraging her to vent her concerns and dream of a different future. She met with Voltaire and other enlightened minds in a covert reading circle that she had founded. Their debates about politics, philosophy, and Enlightenment ideas kindled something within her. Catherine found in these principles a path not only to her own freedom, but also to the reform of an oppressed country. Catherine's star started to grow as Peter's rule became increasingly chaotic due to unpopular policies and impulsive actions. Her poise, intelligence, and dedication to progressive causes won over both influential court factions and the general populace. She represented optimism for a better future for them, which stood in sharp contrast to the Tsar's growing instability. The murmurs of discontent turned into a chorus as a result of Peter's decision to side with Prussia in the 7 Years' War, which many people believed to be disastrous for Russia. Sensing her opportunity, Catherine started to spin a web of mystery. She nurtured ties with the armed forces, gained the backing of influential figures, and strategically exploited the seething animosity towards Peter. It broke in June of 1762. Catherine oversaw a bloodless coup d'état with the support of the armed forces and the tacit consent of the public. Peter was compelled to abdicate, leaving his destiny up in the air after being left behind and alone. The news of Catherine's accession to the throne spread like wildfire throughout Russia. The empress of all the Russias was once the German princess, ensnared in a loveless union. Her adventure was far from over, though. Although she still bore the scars of a turbulent marriage, they also strengthened her resolve to steer Russia's course in accordance with the ideals of progress and enlightenment, as well as the tenacity that had seen her through the difficult times. June 1762, Petersburg. Anticipation was high in the air as a quiet storm was building beneath the lavish exterior of the metropolis. This night was unusual for Catherine, trapped as she was in the golden cage of her marriage. The murmurs in the darkness tonight promised power, the result of years of simmering dissatisfaction and painstaking planning. Catherine's union with Russia's Tsar Peter III had been a botched political deal. His silly antics, spurred on by transient mistresses and Prussian drills, stood in sharp contrast to her reform-mindedness and intellectual curiosity. Disgrace gnawed at her, but Catherine's determination hardened with every contemptuous laugh and brutal dismissal. She wasn't by herself. Confidants they could trust appeared in the quiet corners of the palace. Grigory Orlov, the attractive officer, kept her spirit up with his unwavering loyalty. As her strategic advisor, the experienced diplomat Nikita Panin created the plan for a risky action. Catherine successfully handled the shifting sands of European politics, forming alliances with Prussia and Austria to counteract the strength of France. She used tactful diplomatic maneuvers to protect Russia's boundaries while preserving its influence on the global scene. Catherine struggled with both personal and political issues as her reign came to an end. Her legacy, though, remained deeply ingrained. By transforming Russia from a backward state into a significant European power, she had established the foundation for reforms to come. Under her rule, the arts blossomed, the economy developed, and the nation's frontiers extended dramatically. The reign of Catherine the Great was a nuanced, multi-dimensional picture. She was a strong, visionary, and extremely intelligent lady who gained power and left a legacy of reforms, cultural enlightenment, and territorial expansion. Her techniques are still up for debate, though her accomplishments were not without cost. But there's no doubting that Catherine the Great inscribed her name on history, determining Russia's future and making a lasting impression on the international scene. Petersburg in 1774. The throng is silent beneath the opulent domes of the recently built Hermitage Museum. Catherine the Great, the Empress of all Russias, walks by in a glittering emerald gown in the gentle candlelight. She's a patron tonight rather than a ruler, her love of learning and the arts lighting the space more brilliantly than any chandelier could. During Catherine's reign, power politics and territorial expansion were not the only things at play. It was a conscious attempt to turn Russia into a center of Enlightenment ideas and a cultural awakening. Drawing inspiration from thinkers like Diderot and Voltaire, she viewed knowledge as the means to advancement and beauty as a unifying force among people. Her greatest lasting contribution, the Hermitage, expanded beyond a simple museum. It held an extensive collection of European artwork, ranging from Renaissance masterworks to classical sculptures. Being an avid reader and collector, Catherine made sure her museum was on par with any in Europe by hand-picking many of the pieces. She didn't stop there, though. Universities and theaters flourished under her patronage. Petersburg became a shelter for French playwrights like Denis Diderot, whose ideas sparked intense debates and challenged social standards. Support was given to Russian authors such as von Wiesin, whose scathing plays mirrored the social realities of the day. Education was prioritized, and both aristocratic and common schools were founded. Catherine wrote a lot on her own. Her philosophical book, Instructions, which outlined her goal for enlightened leadership and served as a guide for her reforms, captivated European academics. Her correspondence with Voltaire was lively, and her quick wit and sincere desire to learn were evident in their intellectual conversations. The quest for knowledge was not exclusive to Western customs. In order to close the distance between Russia and the East, Catherine ordered translations of books written in Arabic and Persian. She recognized the value of cross-cultural communication and understanding so much that she even founded an institute for the study of Oriental languages. Nevertheless, there were inconsistencies among the creative achievements. Enlightenment idealist Catherine continued to rule with total power. Despite being progressive, her reforms did not alter the fundamental principles of serfdom, leaving many Russians unaffected by the cultural explosion. Nevertheless, her influence on the Russian cultural scene was irrefutable. Petersburg changed under her leadership from a frontier town to a thriving metropolis where Russian and foreign writers, artists, and intellectuals interacted and shared ideas. Russian as a language flourished, enhanced by both original and translated works. The impact of Catherine as a patron of the humanities and sciences is nuanced. Although she did not establish an ideal society, she did pave the way for Western ideas and ignite a creative flame that would last long beyond her rule. She created the conditions for a day when Russia would be seen as an equal participant in Europe's intellectual life rather than as an outsider by virtue of her patronage. Not only is Catherine's story set in the quiet hallways of the Hermitage, but it is also the story of a lady who dared to dream of a better, more enlightened future for her large and diverse nation, one that is reflected in every artwork that hangs in the museum. Maybe her greatest legacy is that. Catherine the Great inherited not only an empire, but also a nest of difficulties after seizing power in a bloodless coup. Russia's foes ranged from resentful nobility to cunning foreign powers, posing a threat to her rule and survival from both inside and outside her borders. However, Catherine, a lady of extraordinary tenacity, Catherine successfully handled the shifting sands of European politics, forming alliances with Prussia and Austria to counteract the strength of France. She used tactful diplomatic maneuvers to protect Russia's boundaries while preserving its influence on the global scene. Catherine struggled with both personal and political issues as her reign came to an end. Her legacy, though, remained deeply ingrained. By transforming Russia from a backward state into a significant European power, she had established the foundation for reforms to come. Under her rule, the arts blossomed, the economy developed, and the nation's frontiers extended dramatically. The reign of Catherine the Great was a nuanced, multi-dimensional picture. She was a strong, visionary, and extremely intelligent lady who gained power and left a legacy of reforms, cultural enlightenment, and territorial expansion. Her techniques are still up for debate, though her accomplishments were not without cost. But there's no doubting that Catherine the Great inscribed her name on history, determining Russia's future and making a lasting impression on the international scene. Petersburg in 1774. The throng is silent beneath the opulent domes of the recently built Hermitage Museum. Catherine the Great, the Empress of all Russias, walks by in a glittering emerald gown in the gentle candlelight. She is a patron tonight rather than a ruler, her love of learning and the arts lighting the space more brilliantly than any chandelier could. During Catherine's reign, power politics and territorial expansion were not the only things at play. It was a conscious attempt to turn Russia into a center of Enlightenment ideas and a cultural awakening. Drawing inspiration from thinkers like Diderot and Voltaire, she viewed knowledge as the means to advancement and beauty as a unifying force among people. Her greatest lasting contribution, the Hermitage, expanded beyond a simple museum. It held an extensive collection of European artwork, ranging from Renaissance masterworks to classical sculptures. Being an avid reader and collector, Catherine made sure her museum was on par with any in Europe by hand, picking many of the pieces. She didn't stop there, though. Universities and theatres flourished under her patronage. Petersburg became a shelter for French playwrights like Denis Diderot, whose ideas sparked intense debates and challenged social standards. Support was given to Russian authors such as von Vizin, whose scathing plays mirrored the social realities of the day. Education was prioritized, and both aristocratic and common schools were founded. Catherine wrote a lot on her own, her philosophical book Instructions, which outlined her goal for enlightened leadership and served as a guide for her reforms, captivated European academics. Her correspondence with Voltaire was lively, and her quick wit and sincere desire to learn were evident in their intellectual conversations. The quest for knowledge was not exclusive to Western customs. In order to close the distance between Russia and the East, Catherine ordered translations of books written in Arabic and Persian. She recognized the value of cross-cultural communication and understanding so much that she even founded an institute for the study of Oriental languages. Nevertheless, there were inconsistencies among the creative achievements. Enlightenment idealist Catherine continued to rule with total power. Despite being progressive, her reforms did not alter the fundamental principles of serfdom, leaving many Russians unaffected by the cultural explosion. Nevertheless, her influence on the Russian cultural scene was irrefutable. Petersburg changed under her leadership from a frontier town to a thriving metropolis where Russian and foreign writers, artists and intellectuals interacted and shared ideas. Russian as a language flourished, enhanced by both original and translated works. The impact of Catherine as a patron of the humanities and sciences is nuanced. Although she did not establish an ideal society, she did pave the way for Western ideas and ignite a creative flame that would last long beyond her rule. She created the conditions for a day when Russia would be seen as an equal participant in Europe's intellectual life rather than as an outsider by virtue of her patronage. Not only is Catherine's story set in the quiet hallways of the Hermitage, but it is also the story of a lady who dared to dream of a better, more enlightened future for her large and diverse nation, one that is reflected in every artwork that hangs in the museum. Maybe her greatest legacy is that. Catherine the Great inherited not only an empire, but also a nest of difficulties after seizing power in a bloodless coup. Russia's foes ranged from resentful nobility to cunning foreign powers, posing a threat to her rule and survival from both inside and outside her borders. However, Catherine, a lady of extraordinary tenacity and political savvy, resisted being convinced otherwise. She would take on her enemies head-on and come out on the other side as a seasoned leader. At first, the very nobility who had supported Catherine's ascent posed the biggest threat to her authority. She was assertive, which turned off many people who were accustomed to having power under weak leaders. Amidst the sumptuous shadows of the castle, there were simmering plots and conspiracies driven by animosity and personal ambition. A deadly coup attempt by a gang of disgruntled guards in 1764 exposed the weakness of her authority, but Catherine turned out to be a really astute negotiator. She quickly put an end to the oppressing by making compromises and gently reminding the nobles of their reliance on her for guidance. It wasn't just the wealthy who were unhappy. Anger was stoked by the misery of the serfs, who were subjected to terrible living circumstances and few liberties. The charismatic Cossack Emelian Pugachev started a rebellion in 1773 that rocked Catherine's government to its core. With the oppressed being promised land and freedom, Pugachev's army developed quickly and threatened to engulf the provinces in the center. In the face of an overwhelming obstacle, Catherine showed incredible perseverance. She organized obedient soldiers, used shrewd diplomacy to isolate the rebels, and ultimately put an end to the uprising in 1775. Even though it was brutally put down, the Pugachev uprising was a clear warning of the weaknesses in her dominion. Catherine had to negotiate a complicated web of geopolitical disputes outside of her boundaries. Once an ally, Prussia turned adversarial in the struggle for power in Eastern Europe. Austria, concerned about Russia's increasing influence, established coalitions to balance it. Russia and the Ottoman Empire, longtime rivals, fought for territorial claims in the Black Sea region. Catherine was a brilliant diplomat who knew how to play both sides and find a middle ground. To accomplish her goals, she waged strategic conflicts, forged shaky alliances, and took advantage of rivalries among her adversaries. Her conquest of the Black Sea during the Russo-Turkish War of 1768-1774, coupled with her annexation of Crimea in 1783, increased the extent of her empire's southern frontiers. However, every win had a price, depleting finances and straining ties with surrounding nations. Catherine had difficulties, even with her own family. Paul, her son, publicly opposed her ideas and harbored a profound dislike for her strict reign. This tense relationship that threatened to topple the monarchy cast a shadow over her legacy. But Catherine was a practical person. She made sure Paul went to school and made an effort to heal their differences, but their disagreement remained. Catherine had come through many storms and emerged stronger and wiser as her reign came to a close. She had outwitted opponents, put an end to uprisings, and thwarted schemes, all while holding on to power in the face of overwhelming odds. Nevertheless, the wounds from these conflicts persisted, signifying the unstable nature of her role and the ongoing power struggle. The fights Catherine fought both domestically and abroad were not isolated incidents. Rather, they were deeply ingrained in the fabric of her reign. They helped to mold her policies, put her will to the test, and ultimately cemented her standing as a cunning and tenacious leader. There is no doubting that Catherine the Great, with her cunning, tenacity, and political savvy, successfully traversed perilous terrain and cemented her status as one of Russia's most outstanding rulers, even though her methods and accomplishments are still up for debate. Petersburg in 1791, Catherine the Great, who was once lively, was sitting and staring out the window at her city's spires, blanketed with snow. Her face was frost-etched with age, yet there was still the spark of a woman in her eyes who had dared to take the throne and change the course of her country. With aging came not only physical deterioration, but also a wave of self-reflection. Her reign was a patchwork of bright reform, expansion, and cultural brilliancy intertwined with black knots of unrealized dreams, compromise, and rebellion. Remorse mixed with pride as she thought back. Through battles and shrewd diplomacy, the empire expanded, solidifying Russia's standing as a major player in Europe. There was a great sense of fulfillment in witnessing the arts and sciences grow under her patronage, with the Hermitage serving as a beacon. Still, the Pugachev insurrection cast a shadow over her mind, a clear reminder of the divide between lord and peasant. Numerous serfs' lifestyles continued to be restricted, and their predicament was a continual blot on her idea of advancement. The shackles persisted in sharp contrast to the principles she advocated, even if she had reduced their burdens through certain changes. This contradiction weighed heavily on her soul. She also considered her personal relationships. A complicated web of political pragmatism and alliances had taken the place of the love that had motivated her early years with Grigory Orlov. A frequent source of disappointment, the fractured relationship with her son, Paul, hurt her deeply. But amid the regrets, there was also a strong sense of accomplishment. She had overcome all odds, won the crown with pure determination, and bravely and shrewdly negotiated in a dangerous political environment. She had completely changed Russia, creating the foundation for upcoming changes and cultural breakthroughs. Her eyes went to a picture of her predecessor and inspiration, Peter the Great. She had outdone him in many respects, enlarging the empire and making a more profound impression on the spirit of the country. However, similar to him, she had exercised authority with an iron grip, foregoing personal liberties in the interest of stability. The issue of legacy was quite prominent. Would history remember her as the autocrat who upheld the serfdom system, or as the enlightened empress who brought in a new era? The final arbiter would be time. Catherine realized that her time was running out as the rest of the sunshine disappeared. However, her spirit's fire never went out. She found solace in the fact that she had led an exceptionally bold and successful life, making a lasting impression on the world. The errors and regrets were inevitable on the path and served as a reminder of the complexities of both human nature and power. She sighed and moved her head away from the window to look at a pile of incomplete memoirs, victories and setbacks, a legacy that will motivate and spark discussion for many years to come. Petersburg in 1792. A quiet reverence reverberated through the Winter Palace's once vibrant halls. Age had crept over Catherine the Great like a winter frost, leaving creases on her once spirited face. Her hand trembled a little as she gripped the quill, though her eyes still had the spark of the lioness that mounted the throne. Every letter she wrote, recording her life's path, seemed heavy with the imminence of impending dusk. Her once strong health has turned into a vacuous enemy. Her body was riddled with coughs, and exhaustion was a persistent shadow. However, her spirit's fire remained unquenchable. Determined to ensure her legacy before the curtain fell, she clung to life with the same determination she had once used to cling to power. The prospect of death had long cast a shadow over her aspirations. The issue of who would succeed her loomed huge, like a storm cloud that threatened to topple the structure she had worked so hard to build. Her son, Paul, remained a mystery. Despite his education and sophistication, Catherine was terrified of him because of his volatile temper and smoldering hatred of his mother's rule. She carefully raised Paul's son, Alexander, her young innocence, a blank canvas on which she intended to inscribe her legacy out of desperation to avert a chaotic future. She lavished him with attention, instilling the values of the Enlightenment that had steered her rule in addition to the weight of power. But it appeared that fate had different ideas. Despite his desire to please, Alexander lacked the steely will needed to steer clear of the dangerous currents of courtly intrigue. As her health continued to worsen, Catherine was faced with the difficult challenge of making sure her changes would stand the test of time. She started working very hard as a result of this urgency. Her legal reforms, the Charter to the Towns and the Charter to the Nobility, were codified with the intention of modernizing and fortifying the administrative framework. She hoped that by etching a brick in the wall with every pen stroke, her legacy would be protected from the winds of change. Still, uncertainty tore at her. Would time prove her efforts to be successful? Would Paul destroy the very systems she had laboriously created, consumed by his resentment? She struggled with uncertainty, which was painful in contrast to all of the accomplishments she painstakingly detailed in her memoirs. Catherine held fast to the thought that her legacy would live on during her last days, amid the clatter of medications and the quiet murmurs of courtiers. She perceived in Alexander a glimmer of the principles she supported and the capacity to continue the advancement movement. Securing his succession after Paul was her last-ditch effort to realize her vision of the future. It was a desperate risk. The winter wind took Catherine the Great's last breath on November 17, 1796. An era ended as the bells of Petersburg tolled. The legacy of the woman who defied expectations, rose above her station, and shaped the course of an empire is just as complex and varied as her own life. It was still up for debate whether her reign had successes and failures, changes and paradoxes. Nevertheless, her influence was irrefutable. She had opened up Russia's frontiers, modernized the country, and promoted a rebirth of culture. Long after her death, the seeds she sown would bear fruit, bearing witness to the unwavering spirit of the lady who dared to hope for a better tomorrow. The longest reigning female queen in Russian history was Catherine the Great, usually referred to as Catherine II. During her reign, which lasted from 1762 to 1796, Russia gained prominence in Europe, modernized her armed forces, and opened up new frontiers. In addition, Catherine supported and contributed to the creation of the arts and sciences. Petersburg is a hub for culture. In 1729, Sophie Friederike Augusta von Anhalt-Zerbst gave birth to Catherine in Stettin, Prussia. She was a small German prince's daughter. She married Peter III, the apparent heir apparent to the Russian throne, in 1744. Catherine swiftly assumed control of the marriage since Peter was a sick and unpredictable guy. In a coup d'etat in 1762, Catherine ousted Peter III and assumed the throne as Empress of Russia. She started modernizing the nation right away. She brought about changes in the administration, military, and economy. She supported the humanities and sciences and established hospitals and schools. Russia had significant expansion during Catherine's rule. She expanded Russia's sphere of influence into the Caucasus and the Balkans and acquired Crimea, Poland, and portions of Finland. She also elevated Russia to prominence in European politics. Catherine was a contentious person. She received flack for her opulent lifestyle, repeated relationships, and dictatorial reign. She is also recognized, though, as a formidable and capable leader who contributed to Russia's rise to prominence in the modern era. At the age of 67, Catherine passed away in 1796. Paul I, her son, succeeded her. Catherine the Great left behind a complicated and varied legacy. She is regarded as a capable and forceful leader who contributed to Russia's rise to prominence in the contemporary era. She is chastised, meanwhile, for her ostentatious lifestyle, her dictatorial reign, and her multiple relationships. The legacy of Catherine is still up for discussion. She was a superb leader who contributed to Russia becoming a modern nation, according to certain historians. Some regard her as an oppressive monarch who upheld the serfdom system and silenced critics. In the end, Catherine left behind a conflicting legacy. She was a complicated, paradoxical person who accomplished great things, but also committed grave errors. Russia saw significant upheaval during her rule, and her legacy will live on in the annals of the nation. After a bold coup in 1762, Catherine the Great, Empress of all the Russias, took over the throne and inherited a sizable but unstable empire. However, she wouldn't let limitations imposed by the present day stop her. Catherine undertook an astounding geographic expansion, permanently altering the topography and chronicles of Eurasia, driven by a combination of tactical foresight, geopolitical exigency, and personal aspirations for fame. In order to gain access to warm water ports and trade routes, Catherine focused her attention on the south. Crucial were the Russo-Turkish Wars, 1768-1774 and 1787-1792. Gaining control of Crimea allowed the empire to enlarge its southern frontiers and gain access to the Black Sea. Russia's position in the area was reinforced, and trade was encouraged by this calculated action. Siberia beckoned with undiscovered wealth and possibilities, a seemingly unending expanse to the east. Catherine approved mapping missions that staked claim to sizable portions of land for the empire under the influence of adventurers and business people. The fur trade was booming, pushing the empire's eastward expansion over the Urals and boosting its coffers. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth's impending collapse presented an intricate opportunity. Along with Prussia and Austria, Catherine masterfully manipulated events and used diplomacy to arrange the partitions of Poland in 1772, 1793, and 1795. This contentious action greatly increased Russia's western territory and caused generations-long simmering animosity between Poles and Russians. Another aim was the strategically significant and ethnically diverse Caucasus area. The goal of military campaigns was to seize crucial lands and maintain control over important mountain passes. Despite harsh opposition and sometimes brutality, these conquests increased Russia's dominance and southern boundaries. The effects of Catherine's territorial expansion were significant and long-lasting. By combining people from several languages, cultures, and religions, it greatly expanded the Russian Empire's territory and variety. This created problems for assimilation and the government, leaving a legacy of conflict and cross-cultural interaction. Access to new trade routes and resources increased the empire's economic success. However, protecting and preserving these large lands came at a high cost, taxing resources and escalating unrest within. Russia became a significant geopolitical force in Europe, upending the previously powerful nations of Austria and Prussia. But tensions with surrounding nations also increased, paving the way for more hostilities. The persistent perception of Catherine as a land-grabbing empress frequently obscures the nuanced aspects of her intentions and the internal discussions around her territorial expansion. While some perceived it as imperialism motivated by personal ambition, others considered it essential for both economic advancement and national security. In the end, Catherine's territorial expansion had a lasting impact on Eurasia's history and map. It helped to define the boundaries of contemporary Russia and its surrounding states, and its legacy is still felt today in the political and cultural spheres. When Catherine the Great came to the Russian throne in 1762, she inherited a sizable but antiquated military. The once powerful military, known for its overwhelming might, had lagged behind its European rivals in terms of planning, strategy, and armaments. Catherine started a thorough modernization program with the intention of turning the military into a potent tool of her expansionist intentions and a symbol of national might. She saw this vulnerability as a threat to Russia's security and aspirations. She started by addressing the organization's problem. The heavy command structure was streamlined despite being corrupt and ineffective. Prussian-inspired reforms brought about a more professional officer corps that was based on merit and skill rather than aristocracy. Drilling techniques were updated, training materials were translated, and regiments were standardized. As a result, the force became more cohesive and disciplined and was able to carry out difficult actions. Second, Catherine concentrated on developments in technology. Acknowledging the supremacy of European armaments, she founded new foundries and factories to make artillery pieces, cannons, and muskets with the newest technology. Additionally, she actively sought out foreign information by inviting knowledgeable officers and engineers to impart their experience to Russian forces. This promoted an innovative and adaptable culture inside the military, in addition to raising the caliber of weapons. Thirdly, Catherine dealt with the difficulties posed by a large empire's logistics. She restructured the commissariat system, built supply depots, and enhanced transportation networks to guarantee the effective delivery of troops and supplies across great distances. This reorganization of logistics was essential to maintaining campaigns outside of the empire's core. Modernization wasn't without its difficulties, though. The ingrained nobility, who felt their privileges were endangered, opposed the shift to a more professional officer corps. Peasants became disgruntled as a result of the measure's burden on the treasury. Furthermore, incorporating foreign knowledge and strategies strained relations with military traditionalists. Despite these obstacles, Catherine's work paid off. Through a string of triumphant campaigns, the upgraded Russian army demonstrated its capabilities. While conquests in the east increased the empire's boundaries, victories against the Ottomans provided access to the Black Sea. These victories demonstrated the success of Catherine's reforms and were largely attributed to the freshly equipped and trained troops. Catherine's modernization of the military left behind a wide range of effects. It laid the groundwork for the highly skilled and capable Russian army that would go on to defeat Napoleon and rule Europe in the early 1800s. But it also strengthened the Tsar's autocratic rule by adding to the state's increasing militarism. Catherine the Great's modernization of the Russian military was a strategic and ambitious effort. She changed an inefficient army into a modern, efficient one by implementing reforms, advancing technology, and enhancing logistics. In the process, she shaped Russian history and left a lasting mark on the geopolitical landscape of Europe. The Russian Empire was an outpost of Europe's political and cultural sphere until Catherine the Great took the throne there in 1762. Russia remained essentially isolated despite its enormous size, and its Western neighbors looked upon it with a mixture of interest and concern. But the aspirational empress had different ideas. Catherine would use military force, cultural patronage, and political scheming to turn Russia into a significant European power, permanently shifting the continent's power dynamics and leaving a lasting legacy. Catherine realized that using force alone would not improve Russia's standing. She made use of her keen diplomatic abilities to negotiate the intricate network of conflicts and alliances that shaped European politics. She developed connections with influential people, such as Frederick the Great of Prussia, creating tactical alliances while retaining a high degree of uncertainty to keep competitors guessing. But when it came to using her muscles, Catherine didn't back down. Her capacity to lead victorious battles was demonstrated during the Russo-Turkish Wars, 1768-1774, which allowed her to secure access to the Black Sea and weakened her long-standing enemy, the Ottoman Empire. Along with gaining Russia more territory, these successes won Russia the respect and recognition of other European nations. Catherine recognized the potential value of soft power in addition to military might. She adopted Enlightenment values and started supporting the humanities and sciences. As a thriving center of culture, Petersburg drew well-known European philosophers, artists, and builders. Catherine herself communicated with such thinkers as Diderot and Voltaire, demonstrating Russia's dedication to modernity and advancement through their intellectual exchanges. In addition to improving Russia's standing abroad, this inflow of culture set the stage for later creative and intellectual movements within the empire. Under Catherine's patronage, the Hermitage Museum was founded and grew into a repository of European artifacts that demonstrated Russia's involvement in and contribution to the wider cultural world. Having a solid domestic base was essential to projecting power overseas. In order to update the government, legal system, and economy, Catherine started a number of internal changes. Despite the fact that the established power structures frequently limited the scope of these reforms, They nevertheless showed her dedication to development and her wish to see Russia compete on an equal footing with other European countries. Catherine had succeeded in her goal by the time of her death in 1796. Russia was now a significant actor on the European scene, no longer an outsider. During her rule, there had been gains in territory, diplomatic victories, and cultural development. Her legacy is still complicated, though. The seeds of serfdom, the enormous disparities that existed within the empire, and the limitations of her reforms cast a shadow over her accomplishments. It is impossible to dispute Catherine's impact on European history, despite its complexity. Russia entered a new age marked by her arrival, one in which its interests and voice could no longer be disregarded. Her cultural patronage, internal reforms, and strategic leadership paved the way for subsequent developments in the 19th century. She also questioned the power structures that currently exist in Europe, opening the door for fresh rivalries and alliances that would influence the future of the continent. Although there is ongoing discussion on Catherine's strategies and intentions, it is undeniable that she came out of the great game of European politics as a strong leader who turned Russia into a significant force. Her rule is a poignant reminder that empires come and go, leaving behind legacies that reverberate over decades and geographic distances. In the opulent halls of 18th century Russia, amidst the whispers of court intrigue and the clink of champagne glasses, sat an empress unlike any other, Catherine the Great. Crowned with blood and a passionate adherence to the Enlightenment, she changed Petersburg, transformed from a sleepy outpost into a thriving center for the arts and sciences, irrevocably changing the face of her enormous empire's cultural environment. There was more to Catherine's sponsorship than just beauty. She took a calculated action with the intention of modernizing Russia, enhancing its reputation abroad, and enhancing her own stature as an intelligent leader. She was anxious to infuse her territory with the creative and intellectual spirit that was sweeping across Europe, seeing herself as a bridge between the West and the East. Under Catherine's careful supervision, Petersburg experienced a revival in architecture. Russia's developing sophistication was seen in the neoclassical beauty of palaces like the Winter Palace and the Smolny Convent. Attracted to the city, French and Italian architects permanently altered the city's skyline. The Empress herself corresponded with luminaries of the Enlightenment like Diderot and Voltaire, having philosophical debates with them on everything from woman's place in society to political reform. She founded the Free Economic Society, promoting discussions about economic and scientific developments in public forums. Catherine developed a strong interest in art collecting and gathered a remarkable collection of works by Western European masters. Her idea, the Hermitage Museum, put Petersburg on the map of cultural capitals the moment it opened its doors in 1764, showcasing masterpieces by artists ranging from Rembrandt to Raphael. Understanding the importance of performance, Catherine promoted the growth of Russian theatre. Playhouses were built, actors were taught, and French authors were invited. She blurred the boundaries between ruler and artist, even penning comedies herself. By financing the publication of native writers and translating foreign works into Russian, Catherine actively supported literature. Her autobiographies, written for future generations, provide an intriguing look into her life and inspirations. The Empress encouraged academics like the eminent mathematician Leonhard Euler and created universities in addition to sponsoring scientific missions. This dedication to the scientific method created the foundation for later developments in a number of domains. But Catherine's benevolence wasn't without its restrictions. She was an autocrat who was hesitant to enact broad social reforms that would have put her authority in jeopardy, even though she had a sincere interest in Enlightenment principles. The serfs, who made up the great mass of the population, were left out of this cultural renaissance. Notwithstanding these paradoxes, there is no denying Catherine's reputation as a champion of the humanities and sciences. She promoted scientific advancement, creative expression, and intellectual interaction, turning Russia from a backwater of culture into a thriving hub. Her influence extended beyond national boundaries, shaping cultural currents throughout Europe and making a lasting impression on the annals of literature, philosophy, and the arts. The smell of incense and whispered goodbyes filled the air in the Winter Palace, making it heavy. The morning of November 6, 1796, was dismal and chilly, reflecting the depression that was descending upon Catherine's court. The rumors of her death struck through the grand rooms, dispelling the belief that she would always be strong. Her counselors and confidants gathered, each struggling with the approaching emptiness as her breath became shallow. A lifetime of shared secrets and unspoken love was reflected in Grigory Potemkin's eyes, the devoted counsel who had once been her passionate lover. A younger friend, Platon Zubov, seemed to be torn between ambition and grief as he struggled to find his position in the new order. Whispers and uncertainty filled Petersburg's streets outside. The common people were uneasy because they had seen their city modernize and tasted a tiny bit of reform. For them, Catherine was a distant yet kind figure, the iron hand that constructed schools and hospitals. The nobility, a viper's web of loyalties and rivalries, held their breath. Would Paul, who was notorious for his unpredictable behavior and bitterness toward his mother, undermine her accomplishments, or would Russia stick to the course she had set? As she clung to Alexander's hand in her dying moments, Catherine's eyes expressed a wordless request. She saw in him the possibility of a legacy that went beyond her shortcomings and her political gamesmanship. The lady who had defied expectations, removed an emperor, and enlarged an empire passed away with a final sigh, leaving behind a nation that would never be the same. When word of her passing spread throughout Europe, opinions differed. Her literary companion, Voltaire, lamented the passing of an advocate of Enlightenment principles. Her astute diplomacy relieved Frederick the Great of Prussia, who had once been an ally, but history would not pronounce a single opinion. As intricate and varied as her life was, Catherine's legacy persisted. Unquestionably, Russia's borders were expanded, the arts and sciences flourished, and the foundations of legislative changes were laid. However, the persistence of autocratic rule, the repression of criticism, and the spectre of serfdom marred her reign. The instability of Catherine's reforms was brought to light in the years that followed Paul's turbulent reign. She had an impact on Alexander, who later argued for more modernization and the abolition of serfdom. Catherine's image would be contested and reinterpreted over the centuries. Was she the cunning power broker, the wise emperor, or both? It is possible that the reality, akin to her rule, was a multicolored tapestry that showcased the intricacies of ambition, leadership, and the lasting impact of a woman who dared to defy destiny and make her mark on history. Not by blood, but by a bold coup, Catherine the Great, Empress of all the Russias, took the throne and ruled for 34 years, leaving her mark on European history and cartography. Her legacy is still fiercely contested despite being a complicated and multifaceted person with a tapestry of outstanding accomplishments, cunning moves, and persistent paradoxes. Catherine turned Russia from a little-known nation into a significant force in European politics. She increased the empire's territory, gaining access to the Black Sea and undermining the supremacy of other nations through the judicious use of both military might and diplomacy. However, her legacy goes beyond conquests in space. she fostered a thriving cultural scene by supporting the arts and sciences. Petersburg, a city to challenge the major European capitals. One of the best examples of her ideas of growth and cultural interchange is the Hermitage Museum, which houses an immense collection of Western art. But in all the splendor, there are dark corners. In sharp contrast to the Enlightenment principles that Catherine espoused, the great bulk of the populace, the serfs, continued to live under oppression. Her reforms did not fully address the structural injustices that beset her empire, even though they did set the stage for modernity. The intricacies of Catherine's reign were reflected in her private life. In addition to being a deft politician and diplomat, she was an enthusiastic supporter of the arts and had discussions with prominent Enlightenment intellectuals. She maintained a strict social order and silenced criticism by using her iron grip on power. Her intriguing and ambitious personal relationships contributed even more nuance to her mysterious character. In the end, it is difficult to easily classify Catherine the Great. Was she a brutal despot who upheld the status quo, or an enlightened monarch who brought about progress? Maybe the solution is found in the complex web of her reign, where inconsistencies and aspirations were woven in with pragmatism and ambition. Her influence may still be seen in the rich cultural diversity of the huge Russian Empire, in St. Petersburg, as well as in the ongoing discussion about her life and accomplishments. Whether she is praised or criticized, she will always be remembered as a formidable empress in European history, one who dared to hope for a better future for her country and left behind a legacy as fascinating and nuanced as her own life.